live. We have 4 more minutes.
Okay. So what's the turnout we're expecting for today?
90 people. We had 87 people signed up.
Oh, okay.
And because Eventbrite usually sends email back and forth, so majority, mostly they will show up. So far, I think we have something around, I don't see the participants. We have 15 people. We have 10 participants joined us.
This is a question for Rick. Rick, you'll be introducing the judges, right?
Yes. I can't guarantee they will all be in attendance, but they'll be acknowledged.
Yeah, I think Will just signed up this morning, so I know he will join.
By the way, this does say it's recording. I guess we all know that, right?
Yep.
Okay. Our little banter. Good.
Well, as long as our banter isn't about anything embarrassing, like
Exactly.
I guess the only thing embarrassing happened to me recently is that I almost got run over by a turkey. Yes, I was going very slowly on my bike, and the turkey nearly ran into me when I was out.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. Then when I saw it, went to like swerve and avoid it, and I almost got hit by another turkey that was in the street. And yeah, always have to be aware of those rafters of turkeys in Cambridge, causing all sorts of me.
This time of year, they're especially panicky, I suspect.
Either panicky or out for revenge.
Right.
Yeah. So, well, I lived in any case for the time being.
John, I'm really looking forward to your talk, so thank you.
Yeah.
Yep, totally no pressure at all.
Timely.
Yeah, like yeah, I won't get into partisan politics, but definitely the case that this year's a bit more contentious than most.
Mm-hmm.
On the bright side, this means that Medsol tends to get a bit more media attention. On the downside, this means I don't sleep. So
yes,
trade-off. Sleep is overrated. Yeah, be perfectly replaced by caffeine.
That's an odd.
I like your background, Rick.
Yes, very spacey.
It is very Star Trek-y.
Okay, I think we can slightly get started. It's around noon. Let's give it 2 more minutes and then we are gonna start.
Hi, Kurt.
Okay. Should I get started or let's see how many participants? Oh, we have 20 people so far
Mine
joined our.
25.
I'm taking all.
Oh, we're counting us too.
Analysts. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. My suggestion is let's wait till 3 more minutes, 12:05, then we can get started after.
Ahura, who's Joshua?
Joshua, is it in the attendees or is it?
I see something in the chat and I don't know who it is.
Let me check it out. I have. No, I don't know him, unfortunately.
He says that was me kidding from earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we can mention of Netix in chats.
I think you can put a message in the waiting room that will let folks in a minute.
We don't have a waiting room today.
Waiting room. Yeah, they're joining the event.
We can start then.
Yes. Yeah, let's get it started. Okay. Welcome to San Jose State GIS 2020 event. We are very delighted to virtually host this event with exciting program for the next couple of hours. I need to add that we are also live on Facebook via our department page. So I would like to say hi to those who are joining us via Facebook. GISDay has become a very popular annual event to celebrate the technology of Geographic Information System since almost 1999. So it is after 2 decades that we are celebrating this at the San Jose State University, joining many other institutions around the globe. And we are truly delighted to bring speakers and competition to this program. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Professor Laxmi Ramasubramanian, Chair of the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at San Jose State University, to start our program. Let me go on the slide. And while her background, her work has been contributing to the GIS science, educational, scholarly, and professional realms with her books, tremendous research, educational, and community empowerment activities. So Lakshmi, without further ado, I'm gonna share the stage with you.
Thank you, Ahura. Ahura Zandia Tashbar is one of our new GIS faculty who's joined SJSU earlier this year. Colleagues, friends, I'm delighted to welcome you to our virtual campus on behalf of our department, the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, the eCampus at SJSU, and the Spatial Analytics and Visualization Center, the SAVI Center at SJSU. We want to take a minute to honor and acknowledge the original stewards of this land, the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. It is important to acknowledge the sacred and indigenous land we live and work in, and that this institution stands on. It is also important to note the work and sacrifice all of our ancestors and those who came before us made to be here today. Our faculty, Dr. Catherine Richardson, Dr. Carrie Rohrmeyer, Dr. Ahura Zandia Tashbar, and Rick Koss, along with the director of the eCampus, Dr. Jennifer Red, have worked tirelessly and very hard to launch this event. We have an exciting lineup lineup of speakers who will be introduced shortly. We have a story map competition that we're going to present information about. And we are eager to get your feedback about how you'd like to engage with us. So in terms of logistics, please may I ask you to post your questions in the Q&A. We will be monitoring those questions and we will facilitate the discussion. At this moment, I would like to launch a poll um, that just gives us a sense of who is in the audience. And then after the poll is completed, I will hand it over to Dr. Sandhya Tashbar to introduce our first keynote speaker. Thank you.
So the poll is open. Let's give it a couple of more seconds.
As you're taking the poll, please may I also mention that those of you who are interested in AICP CM credits, we are registered to offer AICP credits for attending this webinar.
Okay. The result of our poll, I just shared it. We had everybody basically fill out our poll. We have a good diversity of guests. I assume that you are seeing the result of poll, right? Okay. We have a good mixture of attendees who have a good background in GIS and who are also pretty much intermediate or advanced in GIS. And also we have a good participation from our own students, our own faculty, and also GIS professionals. This is very exciting for us to see how basically the configuration of the audience for us. So let's move on to our first speaker or keynote speakers. At SAVI, we aim to connect GIS application with the societal top issue or social topics. This year, of course, we had many social issues that we could cover, but one of the major topics was election that happened 2 weeks ago. So we are so delighted to invite Dr. John Curiel, a research scientist at the MIT Election Data and Science Lab. It is with the background in political science from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and also primary subfield of American politics and methodology. His work at MIT Election Data and Lab focuses on how electoral institutions mediate the fairness and integrity of election and ensuring representation, which is part of his project that he is leading and working on at the center. That's a continuous to his doctoral research, which in his dissertation, he sought to develop and improve upon measures of party organizational strength and competition and ascertain the extent to which polarization drives the decreased capacity of traditional party leadership. And he used the measures that he developed to investigate states losing redistricting power to courts via gridlock to basically assess the turnout and the turnout in cities, district level and zip code level, and also in general, the health literacy of local elections. So without further ado, I'm going to share the stage with Dr. John Curiel for his presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great to be here. And with that, I guess I will get to the presentation. So let me just share the screen. Okay, and I guess I'll start from the beginning, assuming this works. Aha, there we go. Okay, so yep, thank everyone for being here today. So yeah, as has been stated, I'm John Curiel, and I'm a research scientist with the MIT Election Data and Science Lab. And I'm here today to talk about mapping election performance and the utility of GIS to do so. So for the goals for today then, first we'll just be covering, so what is election science and how we measure election performance. I'll just give everyone some basic background about how everything works. And then from there, we'll get more into the weeds about how GIS can be used in studying election performance, namely in the form of detecting election anomalies, but then also how we can use GIS to measure then voter access and cost, especially as related to polling place closures, which was a fairly major issue this year with the pandemic. So it comes to election science, adds, of course, the scientific analysis of the optimal operation of a voting system. And this basically means that we try to analyze specifically the components of the voting process, where there's basically issues that arise, such as issues in getting to the polls, voter registration, and all of that, which can then lead to issues of whether or not the election was legitimate. And there are going to be 5 primary components of election administration that's studied by election science. The first is going to be voter registration, so identifying who is eligible to vote in a given area. For those who are eligible to vote, how it is they get to the polls. And once they get to the polls, the casting of their ballots. And once everybody who is eligible actually casts ballots, creating the count, the tabulation process. And from there, ensuring that the tabulation process, there were no mistakes or errors, and then certifying the official results. If all this goes according to plan, then we will see an election seen as legitimate and a peaceful transfer of power, with all parties involved seating and accepting the results. And that's ultimately the core of what election sciences is, which is trying to ensure legitimacy via getting everybody to buy into the election. If an election is seen as illegitimate, you cannot have a functioning representative democracy. A recent case of this was seen in Bolivia, which there was a lot of questioning around the ballot custody process, which led to allegations of fraud on the part of the incumbent president, which then led to his overthrow, military taking the streets and trying to address the protests, and a number of deaths. And this process was ultimately only resolved this year. So we definitely want to avoid that. And while it's definitely not the case that proper election administration, as analyzed with election sciences, is sufficient to ensure everybody buys into functioning representative democracy, it's definitely a necessary one. And that then brings us to then trying to quantify and measure election performance. So our goal then is to measure how elections are performing at each of the individual stages that we mentioned above. In doing so, what we're looking for then are reliable and valid measures. Reliable being that we should be able to get the exact same results consistently upon repeated measure. And valid in that we're not measuring noise, we're actually measuring what we're claiming to measure. And if we are able to do this, this will allow for interstate comparisons, being able to claim that one state is better than the other. And then also for over time comparisons, where we are able to track improvements or regressions over time. And we can't just focus either on a single indicator, like let's say voter turnout, which while important, does not comprise the entire process of election administration. And we also have to be very realistic about the data that we have, as there are some data that we would very much like, but if not tracked across time, there's not much we can really use for our purposes. And if all goes according to plan, we can then be able to rebut claims that an election is illegitimate, or in the event that there are issues, actually then say, okay, there is actually some merit, and then address them in the future. And this then brings us to the Election Performance Index, one of the main data sources and indices that the MIT Election Data Science Lab provides and is known for. It was originally developed by a few in 2012, though Metzel has since taken over and providing data from 2008 to 2018. And we're currently in the process of compiling the results for 2020. From there, we have 17 indicators that capture each stage of the voting system, most of it arising from the Election Administration and Voting Survey, which I can talk about more in the Q&A if you're so interested. And the index itself covers then issues such as the registration stage, the registration rate, number of registration applications rejected and getting to the polls, whether or not there are actually tools where voters can look up where they are supposed to vote, overall turnout and wait times, the casting of the ballot and tabulation stage. Provisional ballots cast is definitely important, so whether or not there is some question as to the eligibility of a voter to vote, and if so, if their ballot was ultimately accepted or rejected, and certification consisting of issues such as data availability and whether or not an audit is required within the state. And this then brings us to a brief overview of EPI data for 2016, the last presidential election that we have on hand. Looking at a core cleft map where darker colors reflect worse performing states and lighter colors reflect better performing states, we see that insofar as there are regional patterns, the upper Midwest does fairly well along the Northeast, with Oklahoma and Idaho, unfortunately, not performing so well and placing at the bottom for the nation. However, this is just overall. We're probably interested in looking more into some of the specific indicators, which if we do so, we can look at voter turnout, where we see that insofar as voter turnout tends to be fairly low, not doing so well, it's definitely more of a southern and southwest issue, with states of Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and Arizona performing not so well. If we expand this to, let's say, look at wait times, we see that all the lighter colored states are states that have wait times around 10 minutes or lower, and the states then in that turquoise blue are states that tend to be above, closer to 15 or 16 minutes. And this, again, tends to be primarily a southern issue, especially in states of Georgia and South Carolina. And keep in mind, this was pre-pandemic, so average wait times increased substantially, especially for the early voting process this year, which was not so great if you're trying to vote in these states this year. Looking then at mail ballots rejected, which is definitely a concern, as if there is some issue when one submits their mail ballot, such as not returning on time or not signing the right place, your ballot can be rejected, which means your vote literally isn't counted, which can lead to perceptions that you don't have a voice in the process. We see that it's clustered primarily in the Southeast, around Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, and then also the West, which also happens to correlate with higher use of voting by mail, with the exception of Alabama, which is just not doing so well. And for California, which might be of interest to some of the audience, ultimately California is not doing all that well. It tends to rank consistently in the bottom 5 for the EPI. This year ranked at 48 on average with all of its indicators. If you're wondering why it's not doing so well, looking a bit more in depth at some of the indicators, it tends to have a very high, relatively speaking, rejection rate for registrations. It has a high rate of provisional ballots cast and provisional ballots rejected, meaning that there are a number of people who, when they go to vote, might be turning up at the wrong precinct location, are in some way are not eligible, and ultimately their ballots then are being rejected for some reason, which means the process is going slower and definitely is an area for improvement. All that said, though, the EPI should be seen as a first cut at research and not the end of the story. We have a broad overview thanks to the EPI. We can sort of grade states. However, there are two limitations, which is why it should be expanded upon. One is data availability. We only use data that we have consistent across time. And also this data then relies upon self-reports, which can sometimes be a bit noisy and messy. While Metzel makes an effort to actually go and correct this, there is only so much that we can do. Additionally, though, more getting into causality, we might want to look as to why these states are off. And more specifically for today, where these states are off And how does this matter then in regards to how we might improve states and elections going into the future? And that brings us to the first real GIS topic for today, which is then detecting election irregularities. As tends to be the case, that these indicators can correlate. And this can often be due to just some of the election infrastructure on the ground, but then also related to sometimes to innovate, leading then to some complications. For example, in Georgia, they tried to improve this election, their voting machines, but because of unfamiliarity with these voting machines, that then led to longer wait times as poll workers tried to figure out what was going on. Additionally, then, you might see campaigns cause some complications. And this was the case in New Mexico in 2018, when there was a major push by the state Democrats to move a bunch of new registered voters to vote by mail, which is seen as a less costly form of voting. Unfortunately, in the process, many voters were confused if they were supposed to vote by mail or vote in person, leading many people to go to the polls and find out that they were supposed to vote by mail, leading to a higher rate of provisional ballots. This led to a very contentious process in the 2nd Congressional District, which was highly competitive, and allegations of fraud. Ultimately, upon investigation, turned out that the election was fraud-free, but it still led to a decline in perceived election legitimacy, which we definitely want to improve going forward. So the question is then, how wide is this problem, and also how can we improve that? We can answer this, so that brings about 2 questions then. So how localized are these irregularities? Can we identify these issues with campaign confusion in specific precincts and accredit them to specific canvassing routes and the like? But then also for the center of the controversy, in the case of 2018, Doña County, is it uniquely off? Or is it just the case that it was how competitive the election was that really caught the attention? And we can thankfully answer this with GIS. It's what we can do is we can take several indicators that correlate with some of the confusion that went on, which is the presence of new voters who then requested mail ballots unknowingly, and then all ended up casting provisional ballots. And from there, identify with geocoded data at the precinct level and at the voter level if these are clustered spatially in groups that are not uniform. And we can do this with tests called the Moran eye test, which we can do locally to measure between precinct variation, and a global test for within precinct at the voter level. And we can then from there map the results and try to identify hotspots. Basically then for creating core map like this, where darker colors reflect then a greater number of indicators that were flagged as being spatially clustered across the state at the precinct level. So on the left panel, we have then the state at large from New Mexico, and then on the right side, we have Albuquerque, one of the major cities within New Mexico. We see here, for example, that in most precincts, we don't actually see much spatial clustering going on. Then we see some with one cluster for one of the indicators. And in the case of Albuquerque, we only see then one with 2 spatially clustered indicators, meaning that insofar as there are indicators that are correlating with each other positively, then it's going to be then occurring in these specific locations. But getting to the center of the controversy, Doña County specifically, we see that between precincts, it really only maxes out to 2 indicators between, with then yet 4 precincts that are marked as being flagged at that second level. And then if we look for some of the within clustering, specifically in comparing it to precincts outside Doña County, we don't actually find a significant difference between the 2, suggesting that while there is clustering going on with these indicators geographically, it's not the case that it's unique to Doña Ana, which means that there's definitely the capacity with GIS to find clusters of campaign and election activity, as seen in how voters vote in the process overall. And we can use them in GIS to conduct these deep dives. Insofar as there were claims of suspicious activity, insofar as Doña Ana was supposed to be uniquely bad, we don't actually see this borne out in the GIS data. And more importantly, though, what we can do is we can take this data and go to these voters in these precincts and clear up any confusion that they had going forward. So insofar as then we want to actually improve the election process going on and not just waste our efforts in places that are doing fine, this is all enabled by GIS. But you might want to go deeper into the process, look at indicators that occur before the EPI really starts measuring things. And very crucial to this then, with the election performance index, is going to be whether or not there are operational polling locations, which are important primarily because historically most people vote in person on election day at polling locations. And when we actually have a greater number of open polling locations, that allows for the quick reporting of results, which might be of some interest for some who get anxious waiting to find out who the winner is over the course of a week. Also, though, when we have fewer polling locations, that tends to reduce voter turnout, as people are uncertain where to go and don't want to travel the distance and deal with long lines. And also then when we see polling place closures, which again was a major issue this year, it oftentimes tends to be concentrated to racial minority areas high in racial minorities and urban areas, which then brings up civil rights issues and also litigation, which if you're an election administrator, you probably, at the very least out of self-interest, don't want to be flooded with lawsuits. And this then brings us to then some of the costs that are incurred when you have closed polling places, such as searching costs, so finding out where you now have to vote, given that your polling place was closed, travel costs, so finding out then how far or long you have to travel to your new polling location, and then also queuing costs. And that's going to involve then the issue of long lines. So how many people can be processed in a given polling location, speed, number of processors, all of that. And when these costs are increased, that can then decrease voter turnout, increase wait times, and just make the election process overall seen as less legitimate, which is not good. This year specifically with COVID-19 then, of great concern then, given the unplanned nature of polling place closures, is then whether or not there were specific clusters of areas where there were great increased distances to polls, and then also whether or not these clusters saw then increased overburdens on specific polling locations, leading to excessively high costs for certain areas. And then also of great interest then, combination of these two, is then whether or not poll closures occurred in high COVID risk areas, so predominantly those with higher population densities. Of course, then there's also concern that this might lead to longer lines, and then ultimately a lower voter turnout in general, all of which then would harm a state's ranking on the EPI. And we can measure this today in states that have this data readily available, and we can also measure this for the state first afflicted by COVID-19 trying to run an election, and that would be Wisconsin. So here we have then a core point map of Dane County, Wisconsin, home to Madison, Wisconsin, the state's capital. We have points reflecting individual polling locations, larger points reflecting a higher number of voters at a given polling location, and darker blue dots reflecting then higher non-white populations. Even though we see that on the left side panel, planned polling locations, and right side panel, open polling locations, there were a total of about 30 polling locations closed. We don't actually see much difference at first glance between what was planned versus what was actually opened. And ultimately, it was the case that Madison, for the 2020 primaries, was able to largely mitigate the effect of COVID-19 and ultimately keep most polls open and keep lines short. This stands in stark contrast, however, to Milwaukee County, which was the center of a lot of controversy for what you can obviously see in these maps. For what was actually planned on the left side, we see that there were supposed to be actually over 180 polling locations that were supposed to be opened. That, as we can see, served predominantly heavy non-white areas. What we actually saw opened, however, on primary day is that these reached down to only 5 polling locations in the city proper. The suburbs sort of seeing some closures, but largely being able to keep their polls open. And we did see a lot of spatial clustering going on in such a way that there is actually an increasing amount of evidence suggesting that these poll closures led directly to increases in COVID-19. And this then brings us, though, to a similar urban area, Philadelphia, or Philadelphia County, which actually had time to prepare. Although they similarly consolidated polling locations, they were actually able to do so in a way that it was completely uniform, such that there was no cluster of polling closures. And they were able to therefore keep the burden shared amongst all the voters and address everything efficiently. But while these maps are nice, it's also important then to actually quantify what the costs were, going back to what we talked about earlier. And we can do this by also bringing into place the geocoded data for the voter file for Wisconsin and measure the distance to the polls. And then upon finding out the nearest polling location for a given voter, how many then voters the given polling location served. On the left side, we have then the change in polling distance, the density plot. And we see that insofar as there was an increase in miles to polling location, that ultimately non-Milwaukee counties and areas were able to largely get away without seeing too much of an increase in distance polling locations. But there's a very long tail for Milwaukee, going all the way past the 3-mile marker. In regards to then polling place size, that gets even worse. Whereas most non-Milwaukee areas were able to then, again, get away without seeing much of an increase in size, we see that for Milwaukee, that it goes all the way to well past 30,000 people as the increase in size for a given polling location, which is unbelievably high and suggesting that, yeah, these few polling locations that we saw actually open, these were mega precincts amongst the largest in the state's history. So what we can conclude then with looking at these geocoded polling data is that there is very strong evidence that insofar as there were poll closures, they overwhelmingly affected non-white areas and also urban areas, which also happen to be the places most at risk for COVID-19, which again is not good, as presumably we'd like to reduce its impact. These effects also are not just seen between counties, but also within, as seen especially within the case of Milwaukee. But also very important to note, though, is that all of this research and all its visualization and quantifying of the cost was only made possible thanks to geocoded data and GIS, which is very important going forward as we deal with the after effects of COVID-19 and similarly affected elections and trying to improve from this. So then what can we conclude about GIS and election performance? One is that's obvious that GIS adds a necessary dimension to understanding elections almost by definition. It adds space that otherwise would be missing. With GIS, we're able to identify where problems arise, which then allows us to offer more specific prescriptions on how to improve elections going forward, and also how to do so. We can identify whether an issue is very localized at the precinct level, or if it's an issue statewide that should therefore be addressed by state officials. If we are able to do this, then we can then offer more constructive dialogue as well. As opposed to, let's say, cascading the entire state as being problematic, we can identify specific areas, identify from there whether or not there was malicious intent or was there just honest confusion, and from there take the appropriate actions. And all of this is only made possible with GIS. We can't measure the cost of voting, we can't measure the where to locate people without GIS. And thanks to all the advances over the past few decades, we've seen great advances insofar as election performance is improving into the future. It's all made possible via geo-enabled elections. And with that, I thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to your questions, which I believe are in the chat.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Dr. Rohemeyer, for handling questions.
Excellent. Thanks, John. That was really fantastic. Your research is so valuable for equity and access and participation in our democracy. I have compiled about 5 questions. Some have come in through the Q&A, and I invite our audience members and our panelists to submit more questions for our speaker. But I want to start with an audience question. California and also some other states introduced same-day registration for this recent election. How might that improve the state's EPI?
Oh, that's definitely going to increase election performance, as that's going to essentially allow people to then not worry about whether or not they're registered. So let's say they moved recently, which I know is definitely a problem with the pandemic for many college students. They can basically correct everything at the polls. So then, that's just by definition going to increase voter turnout. Insofar as there's reforms to election administration, same-day registration is seen as the most productive. What should be noted, however, if let's say you're really competitive, just say hey, I want California to be ahead of, let's say, Massachusetts, because, those silly Massachusetts people, should not be nearly as great as California. Do note, though, that if applied universally, this will then increase every state, about equally. So California might stay in its current location. But still, regardless of, your desire to be better than the other states, it should be seen as, a good thing to increase voter turnout. So that's definitely one thing that should increase the performance of elections and make everything more legitimate.
Fantastic. So I think the next question sort of builds on that, or maybe even at a higher level. So in so many ways, this election was different with higher participation, sort of reframing the absentee ballot as a mail-in voting option and a prevalence of drop-off boxes. So I anticipate, as I would ask you, these are trends that are likely to continue in the future. And then how do they specifically change your research questions or your GIS methods and approaches?
So insofar as drop boxes are a thing and are heavily used, insofar as people, let's say, are skeptical about their ballots getting it to the election office in time, drop boxes are great. Then we can basically apply the same methods we did for polling place closures, except to drop boxes, then measure voter access. So how far do you have to travel to actually get to a drop box to ensure that your vote is actually counted? So in some places, that was going fairly well. Like I believe California made a great many advances. Same with Massachusetts. Then there were other states where they basically ran into the same problem as Milwaukee, like Texas, where they limited only one drop box per county, which wouldn't be a problem if, like each county had 100 people, but, that's not the case. You happen to have some mega counties, amongst the largest in the nation, in which case then you ran into the same complications where there were essentially lines to get to drop boxes, or you would have to travel like dozens of miles, which that's not actually reasonable. So it's definitely an improvement that should be expanded across the states, but then also very importantly within counties and jurisdictions, if it is to significantly improve election performance.
So shifting focus a little bit, is it fair to say that involvement of GIS science in political science is growing? And how do you see this in terms of what direction or new directions and applications of GIS are you seeing on your end?
Yes, it's definitely fair to say that political science has been greatly improved by GIS, namely because, as humans, we tend to operate in a world of space-time. So we've to date not really been able to incorporate space as much as we should, which, is fairly important. So like, for example, talking about the 90s with election administration improvement, or more specifically, I guess, 2000s when it really took off, GIS was so computationally intensive and slow that we instead sort of did not really focus on it. So when we were talking about them, let's say same-day registration being a great benefit, we could really capture that because the benefits were so clear, whereas, other reforms might be a bit more mediated by space, such as, for example, polling locations. So thanks to GIS, we're able to actually better measure what these improvements are, more specifically how they operate and where they operate, which means that we're able to then cut out the noise and actually better say with confidence, like, this actually is effective as a reform, or this is not. And thus get a better sense of the voter experience and how to improve it going forward.
Wonderful. So how might a GIS specialist or even a student who's studying GIS, how could they contribute to a successful political campaign? What are some things that we can do?
The very first thing I would say is solve the traveling salesperson problem, which is, for those of you not familiar, that's basically how to get to each point within a set of points in a way that minimizes the time and distance traveled. This is a problem that basically is considered an NP hard problem, meaning that it's not solvable. So basically trying to find the most efficient route is always just a matter of just like trying out something new, seeing if it's better than the alternative. So for example, if you're on a political campaign and doing door-to-door canvassing, you might be losing hours of time just, going about an inefficient route. So if you happen to have GIS skills, what you can do is you can use programs like, let's say, ArcMaps, and actually try to identify the most efficient route, which means you're able to hit more houses within a given set of time, which if you can actually bring that to a campaign, you'll be held as the local campaign savior. You'll be given all the benefits and attention. I can say that from some experience. Additionally, then, let's say you want to do something as advanced. Just figure out, like, which areas should you target? having choropleth maps is of huge benefit, especially then if you're able to like advance onto cartograms. So let's say then have those choropleth maps, then also increase the size based upon their population. That way it's more visually striking. That means you're going to be able to definitely better target specific precincts and the like within a given area. That might be lost just to, you know, the land size bias. These are all things that you can do, just, you know, and they vary in terms of intensity. Visualization obviously might be a bit of a better first step than the solving the traveling salesperson problem. But each of these, depending upon what your goal is within a campaign, will be of immense benefit that I highly recommend.
I think our students really benefit from that advice. Okay, we have just one more question for you, but thinking ahead to 2024, which seems like a long way off now, but is there a way to improve transparency and accountability with regard to our elections through qualitative data and building, say, real-time election dashboards? And are there any examples out now of sort of a real-time dashboard we could look at?
Let's see. So I'd probably say that insofar as we want, you know, real-time dashboards and just very transparent data, North Carolina is the best state, in large part because of their affiliation with the National State Geographic Information Council, which is working on a project called the Geo-enabled Elections. We're taking all the state's data, making it transparent, but then also connecting it to specific geo-coordinated points. So for example, if you want to, you can basically go on the North Carolina State Board of Elections website and actually get the coordinates for each one of their polling locations. You can also do this with Wisconsin, and better yet then, let's say you're trying to identify where voters are supposed to vote. You know, fairly important elections. Wisconsin's made an effort such that each voter is associated with a given point, which can then be matched onto a polygon shapefile. That way there's no mistaking where they're supposed to vote, and then also what ballot they're supposed to receive. Additionally, then, insofar as we're interested then in election integrity, it turns out that, let's say for issues like fraud, which is becoming a major issue, it's very, very, very difficult to actually conduct fraud, and it's immediately detectable with geo-enabled data. So if you happen to have data that's already then geocoded, you can catch it immediately without doubt. So basically, just from every angle, geo-enabling elections is the way to go. So within your own state and other states, just wherever you live, if someone's like asking what innovation should we make with our data, tell them immediately to make it spatial. That will just make everything better. Then also, if you happen to know how to use spatial data, you can just say like, hey, and also you should hire me to do it. So, you know, benefits the public good and also yourself. Never a bad thing.
Fantastic. So I want to open up one last invite to our audience or to our panelists. Would you like to ask any questions for our speaker? Okay, well, thank you so much again. Ahura, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Curiel. That was a very interesting keyword, geo-enabling election. So I'm going to add it to the keywords for GIS classes and GIS project. Thank you. That was a very interesting presentation, very related to the topic that is sort of timely for us. But catching up with the speedy trend of advances in geospatial analytical applications out there is a critical component in GISDay event. Why? Because you might ask yourself, okay, I listened to Dr. Curiel's presentation. Now I want to do, where should I do those type of mapping or analysis that he presented? So we are truly delighted to have Mr. Menke join us today as our technology speaker. He has been uniquely advancing the GIS science realm in both industry and higher education. As a former archaeologist, Mr. Menke is a geospatial journalist, a spatial analyst, cartographer, web map developer, trainer, teacher, and author with a master's degree in geography from University of New Mexico. He is the founder of Bird's Eye View, where he applied his expertise with GIS technology towards solving the world's mounting ecological, economic, and social issue, in addition to his focus areas of public health, conservation, and education. He's an open source GIS authority indeed, recently authored Discover QGIS 3 with Locate Press and co-authoring Mastering Geospatial Development with QGIS for Pact Publishing. He is a charter member of Open Source Geospatial Foundation, educator at the free and open source software for geospatial convention, and he is co-author of the Geoacademy. For his significant contribution to teaching free and open source GIS software, he was awarded the Global Educator of the Year Team Award by Geo for all as part of the Geoacademy team. With this very unique background, I'd like to invite Mr. Menke to present his talk on the best new features of QGIS, which is a free and open source desktop application that can support high-end spatial analysis, visualization, and web mapping.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. And let me share my screen and get this presentation started. My title changed a little bit from last week. So the title of my talk today is at least 10 reasons you should be using QGIS. And I'm going to use this framework to introduce QGIS, the world's leading desktop open source GIS software. I am based in Albuquerque, so the previous talk was quite interesting since New Mexico was featured there. I run my own GIS consulting business, Bird's Eye View. I also work with Community Health Maps, a program I helped develop with the National Library of Medicine. The other bullet points on this slide were already mentioned, so I won't bore you with those. These are the two most recent books I've authored. Is Discover QGIS 3X was developed for classrooms or independent study. It's a 400-page workbook that gives you a really broad overview of QGIS, which I'll introduce as we go through this talk. And the one on the right is QGIS for hydrological applications, which is recipes for catchment or watershed hydrology and water management, which I co-authored with a Dutch colleague of mine, Dr. Hans van der Kwast. So reason number one why you should be using QGIS. First of all, it's open source. So open source, what does that mean? Let's talk about that for a minute. The term open source really has to do with the software license. So there are two main families of software licenses. You have a proprietary license for something like Microsoft Word. And whenever you purchase a piece of software like that, what you're really purchasing is the license, which gives you some rights to use the software. But generally speaking, a proprietary license is designed to restrict your usage in some way, in either the time you're allowed to use the software, the number of features you have access to, the number of computers you can put it on, and so forth. Whereas an open source license flips that upside down and instead grants you rights and freedoms as a software user. For example, the four main common freedoms from the Free Software Foundation are: number one, the right to run the program as you wish for any purpose, to study how the program works. So that's where open source comes into this. To study how the program works, you really need to have access to that source code under the hood. And so most of us are not C++ programmers, but it does give a level of transparency when you have access to that code. So it's not a black box, in other words. So study how the program works and change it so it does what you need it to do. So you there again have the ability with open source software to make modifications and change it. You can also redistribute copies, so you can help your neighbor and distribute copies of your modified versions to others. Number two ties into this. With QGIS, you have the power to add features to the software, which is not the case with a proprietary piece of software. So if you open up QGIS and you start working with it and you find that there's a feature missing or something you wished it did, you can either code it yourself or you could sponsor it by hiring a QGIS developer to do that work. So it's been called a do-ocracy. It's if there's something that you wish it did, you have the power to do that and make it happen. And this little animated GIF that's playing here is my own first experience with this dynamic with the software development, where I work with a lot of vegetation rasters. And there was no elegant way in QGIS several years ago to render each class of vegetation in its own color. So myself and several other users found each other online, and so one of the developers suggested that we scope out our problem and we did. We got a quote. It was more than any of us could individually afford, but we pooled our resources, came up with the money, which I think was 5,000 euros for this feature. And within 3 weeks, this was in the software and has now become one of the mainstays, this paletted unique values renderer that lets you quickly and easily make each cell value and a raster a different color. Reason number 3, you can run it anywhere. So with QGIS, you can run it on Windows, but if you're a Mac user, you can natively install it on a Mac. You can run it on Linux. There's even a way to install it on things like Chromebooks. And there are data collection apps, which are kind of slimmed down versions of QGIS for iOS and Android. There's one called Input and one called QField. Plus QGIS is 64-bit, so it takes advantage of all of your computing resources. Reason number 4, QGIS is both a software, obviously, but there's also a vibrant community behind it. These 2 photos, the one on the left is the QGIS conference in Spain a year and a half ago, and this is the first QGIS conference from 5 or 6 years ago in Denmark. And so what you're seeing in these pictures are the people who are really kind of the power users and developers of the software. And if you get to one of these conferences, you can just sit down over a cup of coffee or a beer and talk to the developers and ask them questions. And it's a very welcoming community. So these are some of the faces of some of the people behind QGIS itself. And so what I really like is that there's some transparency there. You as a software user can reach out to one of the developers and ask them a question, and or post a question to a listserv and get an answer from one of these people quite quickly. And so there's that thinner line between developer and user is really nice. So there are also user groups, national user groups. So there's a QGIS US user group. And this summer, the user group hosted a free online conference since we are in time of COVID. And so I just want to let everyone know that from this YouTube link, you can access all the talks and workshops that were given at this conference in July. Reason number 5, the software is constantly improving and it has a really rapid release schedule. So every 4 months, a new stable release comes out, and there will be an online list in the changelog of all the new features that release had. Because of that fast release schedule, every spring, the latest long-term release gets coined the long-term release. And that's what most people end up using, because you can install that long-term release and it will not change in features for the entire year. So if you're in a professional shop or teaching with QGIS, that is the one that's going to be the most stable over a calendar year. Reason number 6, interoperability. QGIS is truly like a Swiss Army knife for geospatial data sets. There's almost nothing that you can't bring into QGIS and work with, including if you're an Esri user, all the Esri formats, file geodatabases, shape files, web services, and PostgreSQL, which is a spatial database, which is incredibly powerful. So thinking about that, there's a database manager tied to QGIS, and this lets you interact with data layers stored in a spatial database like PostGIS. And it also has a little SQL window you can open up here and run SQL commands to interact with your data in a PostGIS database directly through QGIS, and it's quite fast. So I know today is GIS Day. That's why we're all here. But does anyone know what tomorrow is? Well, tomorrow is PostGIS Day, kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing that the open source GIS community came up with years ago, kind of so that the day after GIS Day is PostGIS Day. And so tomorrow if you search for this on Twitter or something, you'll find several talks that people are giving tomorrow on the open source database PostGIS. Reason number 7, QGIS renderers. So QGIS has gone in the last 5 years to a state-of-the-art cartography data visualization software. And I just have some of the interesting renderers here. So there's separate rendering settings for polygons, points, lines, and rasters. But we have some really interesting things, like for polygons, you can style them in an inverted fashion, so they equal the opposite of themselves. For masking, For points, you have some nice things for creating heat maps from points. For elevation data, you can style an elevation data set as a hillshade or as contours without having to generate separate files for those. So and then you can use each of these in combination with these sub-renderers, and the myriad of options you have for symbolizing a data set almost become endless. Reason number 8, the interactive styling panel. So first here, I'm opening up layer properties, which is very similar to what you would do in, say, ArcMap if you wanted to symbolize a layer, and there's a symbology tab that lets you do those sorts of things, but you have to hit OK or apply to see the result. So several years ago, one of the developers for QGIS came up with this layer styling panel, which allows you access to all the symbology tools in QGIS from this panel, and you see the results immediately. So here I'm working on a choropleth map of counties for the lower 48, and I'm switching out color ramps, changing the number of classes or the mode, and I see the result immediately. And so it makes it very easy to style things. So when this came out, Niall Dawson tweeted, "I've said it once, I'll say it again. Madman Wu's QGIS style doc is the single greatest advance in cartography since Mercator's discovery of the North Arrow in 1972. Obviously a joke there. Number 9, the expression engine. So this is kind of one of the hidden superpowers of QGIS. It has this very robust selection of functions and variables in its expression engine that you can use. For example, this example shows me using a regex expression to replace some text. But there are all sorts of things, and you can use the search function at the top to filter the functions to make things easy to find. So there's things related to time and color and geometry and all sorts of functions in here. So number 10 ties some of those renderers I discussed previously with expressions. There's a renderer called Geometry Generators, which is kind of changing the paradigm of how we can work with spatial data in a way. I have big game hunt units for Colorado up on the screen now, and I made a copy of it. And I'm going to style this using the styling doc and choosing Geometry Generator. And these are polygons, but I've chosen the geometry type of point. And I'm going to feed the geometry of these polygons into a centroid function. And boom, I'm rendering these polygons as centroid points. So this is a very interesting feature because you can use all the expression engine functions in QGIS to change the geometry of your data just in the way you're rendering it. And there's some very interesting things you can do with this. Number 11. Bring something like elevation, the most intuitive 3D situation, and bring it into a 3D mode and start to create animations with that. But it also supports vector data. So on the left, I have the city of New York City extruded into 3D, and I'm doing a fly through on this. So my title of my talk was at least 10 reasons. So I know I'm beyond 10 here. We have a few more to go. So number 12 is geoprocessing. So the previous talk talked a lot about analysis, and QGIS has quite a rich toolbox with hundreds of geoprocessing tools. And the toolbox includes native QGIS tools, but it also brings in tools from other software providers like the open source software GRASS and the open source software Saga. You can bring R scripts in here. You can write, there's a QGIS Python API, PyQGIS. So there's a Python console down in the lower right here that you can use to edit Python and enter Python commands in PyQGIS and do things with them. So this little example shows me buffering some points with a Python command. Up in the center of the screen here, we're looking at the modeler builder, which is another part of the geoprocessing environment. And this lets you graphically create an entire workflow from different data inputs, like a digital elevation model, and then different processing algorithms, like I have a contour one here, and basically drag a myriad of inputs and processing tools to create a custom workflow. And the result of this is then a custom tool that you have created that you can run and repeat that workflow over and over again on different data sets. Down in the center here shows batch processing. So every tool, even including a tool that you developed in the processing modeler, can be run in a batch process against the whole set of input data sets. Another component of geoprocessing which is kind of novel, is this feature in QGIS, which was relatively new, which is called editing in place. And with this, you click a little button on the processing toolbox, and it filters the tools to those that can be used in place, meaning in this example, which we'll reboot here in a second, I have national forests, and I have them for the whole West, but I want to clip them just to the state of Colorado here, which I have highlighted. So I can run the clip tool in edit in place mode and clip this national forest layer to the state boundary of Colorado without creating an output. I'm just clipping the existing layer. And so sometimes that's really nice whenever you can go through a GIS process and not create a bunch of files along the way, that can be a win. So there's a lot of different tools in the toolbox that you can run in this in-place mode. Reason number 13, the temporal controller. This is a feature that just came out this summer. And here you're watching an animation I built back at the end of July of the COVID outbreak by county in the US. And I did this as cases per 1 million people. So we're seeing the rate. And the temporal controller lets you take a data set that has a temporal component in QGIS and animate it and basically observe it through time. So it's a very powerful functionality that's now in the core of QGIS. Another example of that also shows another data model that QGIS supports, which is called mesh data. And mesh data is data that is kind of includes a vector component, which you're seeing wind here, and then also a raster component, which is the colors in the background. And so mesh data is often used with weather data or hydrological models. And so this is a weather data hurricanes that ran through the Caribbean and some of which hit Florida, like Irma. And so here I'm animating the mesh data with the temporal controller, and it just creates some stunning visualization. So you can do some really interesting things like this with QGIS. Number 15 for Esri users out there is this, QGIS has a plugin environment, which are little sub-programs that people have written that allow you to do different things. So the SLYR or Slayer plugin is basically an Esri compatibility suite. And what it lets you do is take an ArcMap MXD, for example, and import it directly into QGIS, which I've done here in this little example. So I'm in the toolbox, or in the browser, I'm right-clicking on an MXD, and QGIS reads it and imports it, and then I could save it as a QGIS map document and start working with it. But if an organization or has a bunch of work done in the Esri environment, this allows them to seamlessly pull that into QGIS as well and work with the same map documents through QGIS. It also works on the Esri layer style files as well and lets you save those to QGIS styles. So it's a fantastic plugin that lowers the bar for entry. And SXDs are ArcScene documents. So you can pull ArcScene documents in and it will create an analog in the QGIS 3D. So number 16 is help resources. There are some, myths about open source software that it's hard to get support or find help. And it is true, it's a different dynamic. When you buy a proprietary license, part of what you're paying run into an issue and get help with that. QGIS works a little bit differently. It works so that you work with the community to get that support. So as part of that, QGIS has a full user manual that gets updated with each release. There are online tutorials. There are listservs that you can use to ask questions or report bugs when you encounter them. There's a lot of blogs and YouTube videos and things like that. And finally, there's books. So there's a lot of nice books out there that let you learn QGIS and learn how to use different parts of it to do different kinds of tasks. So there's plenty of help out there these days. And number 17 is my final reason here. It's free and open source. So you can download it at no monetary cost to you. And I think of GIS like I think of my toolbox in the shed. GIS is just a set of tools, and I have more than one screwdriver in my tool set because I need different screwdrivers for different things. And with GIS, sometimes I need different tools for different things as well. So I encourage people to download QGIS and try it out. Even if you may be using ArcGIS for some things and QGIS for others, or using R for some things and QGIS for others. But you have nothing to lose, basically. And plus, as a reminder, this kind of hidden feature that people don't often think about, you're not paying anything for it. It's free. So if you need a new feature, or need someone to build a plugin for you, you can either sponsor it or you can learn how to code that yourself. And usually that kind of work can be done quite quickly. So it's a really interesting dynamic that is often overlooked. So with that, that's the end of my talk. This is how you can find me online or on Twitter at GeoMenke. And I am excited to hear if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Menke. Actually, there are questions lined up for you. But that was a very interesting presentation. I'm going to change to Dr. Rohamayer. She's going to take care of the questions.
Yes, thank you for that really compelling demonstration. Especially the temporal animations are super impressive. We received a lot of questions, so I'm just going to go one by one, and feel free, audience and panelists, to submit more questions. Okay, you touched on this, but how much user support is there, and how easy is it for a novice to switch to QGIS?
So it's kind of two questions. The first one, in terms of support, like I said, there's quite a bit. The main way people get support for QGIS when you run into an issue or an error message or something is by using the QGIS listservs. And so you can find those from the QGIS.org site. And there are some etiquette to use, like you need to, if you're running into a problem, you need to tell people on the other end what version you're using. Are you on a Mac or are you on a PC? What kind of operation were you running when you ran into an issue? What kind of error message did you get? So kind of give them enough information to help you, obviously. But that will go out to all the people on the listserv, which is all the developers and all the users around the world. And they're especially welcoming to newcomers. And so usually you'll get help within a couple hours that way. And then there's the other channels, like I use GIS Stack Exchange a lot, because a lot of times you're probably not the first one to run into the issue that you're encountering, and you may find an answer by just doing your homework and Googling it and going on to GIS Stack Exchange and finding solutions that way as well. And then I mentioned all the other resources for learning it. So I think in terms of learning it, if you're a new user, I think on the surface, if you've used ArcMap, for example, there's a lot of similarities where you have the layers panel on the left in your map and the pan and zoom tools and a toolbox. So I think it's fairly intuitive once you know your way around a GIS. I'm not the one to judge that because I've been using GIS and QGIS for so long, but I do teach quite a bit. And when I've taught QGIS courses to university students who have gone through an Esri curriculum, I often hear that people find it intuitive. So that's my anecdotal experience on that.
Very good. So we have a question about what language is QGIS written in, and how experienced of a programmer do you need to be to realistically consider creating an add-on?
So QGIS itself is written in C++. The plugins, though, are written in Python. So if you wanted to code a new feature and have it submitted into the core of QGIS, you would do that in C++, and you have to be pretty good. But there are, even with that, there are developers of QGIS who are willing to mentor people to do that kind of work. So there's people you can reach out to for that. you could ask on the listserv. There's a listserv just for developers, and anyone is welcome to join that, and you could ask those kind of questions and see what people say. For writing Python plugins, there's actually quite a bit of guidance on how to do that. There's even a Python plugin starter plugin that kind of stubs out the basic Python code you need for every plugin, and then you have to just fill in the important parts. So I think, it's certainly not trivial to write a plugin, but I think anyone who feels fairly comfortable with Python would figure it out fairly quickly.
Good. You also touched on how you can import Esri files into the QGIS format. Is it vice versa too, taking QGIS files into Esri?
No, I mean, Esri really has no interest in developing anything that would allow an Esri user to import QGIS. They really nothing to gain from developing that, so that probably never will happen. That was just developed by one of the QGIS power developers who really wanted to lower the barrier of entry for users and be able to, and because there's a lot of shops who want to start using QGIS but have years of investment in the ARC environment and all these files, and that becomes prohibitive when you want to rebuild every map document in QGIS. So he developed that plugin just to help people and his clients do that kind of work.
Do you anticipate that QGIS will be able to run in the new Apple M1 format?
Yeah, I'm not a Mac user, but there has been a lot of chatter about that on the QGIS developer list. There are some definitely going to be some issues around that. I haven't seen any major concerns that it wouldn't be able to run, but it's going to take a lot more work. So there's different roles in the entity of QGIS, and there's one thing is packaging up the software at every release for every operating system, and I think it's going to be some extra things are going to have to happen to make the packages when that happens. But I don't know a lot about it, to be honest with you.
Hey, it is an option for Mac users.
Yeah, it is an option.
A real advantage.
Yeah.
So we have a question about how to approach the install. Is Anaconda 3 a good way? And since it's become the main resource for R and Python and scientific computation, and QGIS can find in a repository or in a lower version, or maybe you could give some suggestions around that.
Yeah, so you can install a version of QGIS with Conda, and so that's possible. If you search for that, you will find information on that. I don't have any links handy, but it is possible to install it that way. And on a Linux machine, that's one way I know you can install multiple QGIS versions quite easily using that. In terms, Python, I think is obviously the language of the day for scientific computing, along with R, and QGIS uses Python 3. So when you install QGIS, you get Python 3 installed with it, and you can. So yeah, I recommend people learn Python because there's so much you can do with it at this point.
Very good. That's good advice for our students on the workshop today. Also, about the add-ons, do they cost any money if the base software is free?
No, all the plugins are free. So, well, there's some nuances there. So there's an official QGIS plugin repository. And so if I go and I want to author a plugin, I have the choice of putting it into the official QGIS Python or a plugin repository. There's someone from the QGIS project whose job is to oversee that and approve them, make sure they're going to play nice. But I don't have to publish I could have my own Python plugin that I'm going to use just within my organization and don't want anyone else having access to, and we could just store it on our server, for example, or I could even charge people to use that if I wanted to. So there's nothing that forces you to put something in the official free QGIS. I hope that answers that.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I think that pretty much addresses the audience questions. The panel had a few questions. If you're still game, I think we, coming from higher ed, have a really strong understanding of which organizations use a proprietary GIS software, municipalities, large companies with dedicated staff, and of course, educational institutions. But you're a professional GIS educator. So who are you seeing in the open source GIS community?
I'm seeing, like, locally, a lot of small municipalities who either are, in New Mexico, not all of our 33 counties have digital parcels yet. That we have some counties that are small and have never even had an Esri shop. So some of those counties or municipalities, I find, when they start wanting to get into GIS, will just start with QGIS. A lot of other organizations are starting to cut their licensing fees. Like a state agency might have an Esri license fee of, over, 6 digits for all their Esri licenses. And so some of those are starting to see that they can shed some of that license burden by having some of their users use open source software like QGIS. And so I do see it becoming something that employers are looking more for to make sure their, new hires are versed in more than one. And I think, from my experience too, when I've taught QGIS, and I have students that have come through an Esri curriculum, and then I might have rewritten an Esri lab in QGIS, so they'll understand the data and what they're supposed to be doing, but they have to do it in a different software. And I've seen students really start to get out of that button pushing mode and really start thinking more critically about what they're doing. When they reproduce a workflow in a different piece of software, they start thinking about the data and the end goal a little more. So I think it's helpful to know more than one way to accomplish something from that perspective.
Fantastic. Yes, we encourage that as well. I think our last question is, in addition to QGIS, what are you suggesting are important technical skills for our students when they graduate?
Well, I am a big fan of PostGIS, the spatial extension to the PostgreSQL database. It's an incredibly powerful environment. So it's a free open source relational database, and the PostGIS extension allows you to store your spatial data in there. And it comes with hundreds of spatial functions that allow you to basically run a whole analysis from within PostGIS. And especially if you're working with really large data, there's nothing more efficient and as fast as that. So with that, I recommend people learn SQL. That would be the language that you would be working with in there. And next to something like Python or R, that would be my next recommendation, is to learn SQL. SQL has not changed in the last 30 years. And so once you know it, and it's a really valuable tool to know how to use.
Wonderful. So we got two questions that just popped in. And this one might be directed at Rick Koss, but is it true that Facebook is built around QGIS?
I've never heard that, but
okay.
Not aware of that.
It came in as an interesting question. And then there's another question, and how does QGIS integrate R scripts?
Okay, so some of those and are now handled as plugins. So it kind of becomes an onerous task for the development team of QGIS to pay attention to every release of R or other things like that. So there is one of the users has developed an R plugin. So you have to have R installed separately on your computer, and then you install the plugin and hook it up to where your installation sits. And then you can start running those R scripts through the QGIS toolbox. That's the way those work. And so there's some others like that. There's Tau DEM for working with elevation data sets. There's White Box Tools, which is another interesting processing library that has several hundred tools, and all of those kind of things are now just installed as plugins through QGIS.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for addressing many questions, and thank you to the audience for participating. I'm going to hand it back to Ohora.
Sure. Thank you very much for pretty. Let me make myself spotlight. Thank you very much, Mr. Menke. That was a very interesting and important topic, and we had many questions. Thank you for answering them, every single one of them. So now, with all of this information about GIS and learning about GISDay, it's time to learn about what resources do we have at San Jose State University to support GIS education. For that part, I'm going to invite Dr. Red, and after that, Dr. Rohemeyer, for presenting our valuable resources at San Jose State for supporting GIS education.
Great, thank you. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so I'm glad to have everybody with us today, and we were able to see all sorts of examples so far of really great things. But you're right, the next question might be, well, what do I have available? So just a first thing is, just in case you're not that familiar with the eCampus department, so that's where I'm from, the eCampus department provides support for using all sorts of different software on our campus. So I'm just going to open that up quickly for you. And so at any time, after today, if you have follow-up questions, about the software, about gaining access to things, feel free to reach out. And then we can either answer your questions, we'll be able to help route it to other groups on campus that will be able to answer questions as well. But we are just a resource for you. And so we do support all sorts of different teaching tools, one of which is, ArcGIS and Esri software. So really, what is available? And so we're very lucky to have the GIS Professional Advanced License. And so that's available for all faculty, staff, and students. And really, what does that include? So you can build out advanced maps, you can create different visualizations, and you can conduct analysis. Now, there are two options, right? So there were some questions, okay, if I just have a map, what can I do? So you do have, the option for desktop, which, you'd be using on your Windows device, but then you can use ArcGIS online as well. And so some of the different capabilities that you have available to you, you can obviously manage location data. So, it's not just kind of thinking in 2D, we're also going to have 3D, and that's just using your different geospatial data. You can have single users and multi-users, editing that information together. You can also have where you apply different analytical tools. So this could be 2D, 3D, 4D. You can look for different patterns that emerge. You can help make predictions off that information and answer any questions kind of as you're exploring that particular capability. You can obviously create advanced maps. So you have within the software, you can have multi-attribute symbology. You can have different labeling that's available. You can do different annotation as well. So you do have a lot of capabilities within the software itself. Obviously, you can connect with the ArcGIS Living Atlas of the World. So if you're not familiar with that, you should be. It has so many, so much information within there that you can connect to the maps that you're working on. So that's a really great capability that's available. Depending on what you're trying to do, you can conduct any statistical analysis that you need to do. You can do it, by combining different graphics and then just kind of editing things and testing things out. And then you can obviously combine some different data types together. So, it's whether you have, 3D stuff, imagery, you can just put all of that stuff together within one map. So it's a really nice capability. So those are all kind of the basic aspects that would come available to you. But we're also lucky enough to have additional extensions that are available, so you can do even more stuff with your account. So here are some of the different capabilities, and I think kind of by their names, it might be pretty obvious what they can do, right? So if we're thinking, 3D, right? So that would be, you could have a 3-dimensional visualization. It also connects with ArcGlobe and ArcScene, so in case that would be of interest. If you're doing any sort of aviation stuff, you have that capability as well. Again, there's just all these different choices. So it depends on what you're really trying to do, but it's nice to know that you have these features available to you. So let me just keep scrolling a little more. There's just so many options, right? So if you wanted to be publishing information, there's just a lot of different choices. Yeah, there's so many that they can barely even fit on the screen here. Besides that, right? So up top here, I was mentioning we had, the basic components. You have these additional options that you can have available. Again, it would depend on what type of project or research you're conducting. But there's also these advanced applications that can be made available to you as well. So if you're working on a mobile app, we have a capability for you to add that integration with your account. If you're working on the community analyst piece, you can connect with third-party data if you wanted to. The GeoPlanner capability. So if you're like working with, city or regional or landscape type of scenarios. If you wanted to work with that insights one, it's for exploratory data analysis. And redistricting is more related to regulation compliant types of projects. But hey, if that's something that you're working on, you would have it available to you. So there's just so many choices that you have, probably more than you would even know, where to get started. But that might be then the next question. Great, I'll take it all, but how do I even use any of these things? So besides, our next speaker will talk about some of the programs we offer. We also have some online resources available for you. So there are different training opportunities. So once we create your Esri account, you can access the Esri training catalog. And within that catalog, there's all sorts of different resources available. So you can find documentation that will walk you through kind of how to do something. There's also just, videos that will walk through the steps. Maybe you want more than that. So there's learning plans. There's also like an online course, large online course. There's different story maps that will guide you through things. For instructors, there's teacher resources ready for you to use. There's training seminars, tutorials, and then there's also just built out web courses. So like some examples that you might find in there, when I was just recently looking, they have a lot of stuff about COVID. So if you're looking for different strategies with mapping, facilities, they have stuff in there for you to learn about. If you're interested in drones, they have resources about using drones with mapping. They have ArcGIS and JavaScript, working with large data sets. So there's all sorts of resources in there so that you can search and find and pick and, join into whatever really you want to learn more about. Another feature that is available for instructors is a feature called instructor-led workshops. And so within this, you can choose, it's for faculty and staff. These are workshops just like it says. It's led by instructors that will guide you through more advanced topics. So you're able to actually meet with an instructor that has curriculum designed that you can go through and learn more about whatever topic. And so some of them would be, say, geospatial concepts for intelligence, creating Python scripts for ArcGIS, and creating and editing with ArcGIS Pro. And there's many more than that, but that's just a quick snapshot. But within, all of these resources, you'll be able to learn more. And so I do encourage you, after today, if you don't already have an account, you might want to go in there and take a look because, you can learn something new, that you didn't maybe even know was already available to you. And so with that, I can open it up if there are questions specifically for me about any of this.
Jennifer, there appears to be a question in the chat.
Okay.
It says, I currently, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. The question is, I currently have access to ArcGIS Online. How can I get access to ArcGIS Pro or other advanced applications?
You should already have that available in your account because everyone that has an active account does have that available. So if your account doesn't appear to be looking like you have, or you want to get more extensions added on, because that might be something that you don't have enabled by default, you can just send an email to eCampus@sjsu.edu and we'll get your account updated.
I noticed
Maybe I can show it here. So this is true, like if you have the ArcGIS Online, Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, next to your username, these dots, if you open it, you would see access to other Esri basically applications that we have. And ArcGIS Pro should be somewhere here.
Yeah, it's included in everyone's account once it's been updated to the account permissions. So we can double check if somebody doesn't see it or it doesn't look right. Just reach out and we'll get it set up.
Okay.
Jennifer, there's a question in the Q&A about, does alumni have access to eCampus?
No, I mean, you wouldn't still have access to the software because you would need to be a registered student or a current employee for us to be able to give you it. But if you had a general question, we might still be able to answer it, but typically not with alumni.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. If there is no other question, let's move on to Dr. Rohemir, my colleague, faculty at San Jose State University Department of Urban and Regional Planning and advisor for undergraduate program. Let me share my screen. I'm gonna assist her, our assistant.
Thanks. A question just did come in for Jennifer at eCampus. How do we get, how best to get a hold of you? If you want to throw that in the chat for the students via email, or what the best location is. All right, thanks, Ahura. I'm just going to run through the options for students. According to the poll, we had about half of our audience members are new to GIS, and another half are falling between intermediate and advanced users. And of course, we would like nothing more to see everybody matriculate into an intermediate and advanced, and we're here to get you to those higher milestones with our GIS education options. So go ahead, Ahura, and fast forward one slide. I want to mention that this is actually National Geographic's Geography Awareness Week. GIS Day actually falls on the Wednesday within each Geography Awareness Week. So much to celebrate this time of year. And being a geographer and working with my fellow colleagues in Department of Urban and Regional Planning, you know, studying geography, I think we would all attest, can take you in many exciting directions. You can study the human and relationships to the urban world. You can study the physical and geomorphological landscapes. You can look at how the world is organized into regions. And of course, today we focused on GI science. So the many ways technology can integrate geography across disciplines. All right, let's take a look at the courses that we're offering. Now I want to point out that the courses highlighted in the gold color for San Jose State are offered this coming spring. So we are trying very hard to offer both the introductory and the advanced GIS course almost every semester. So if you're interested in learning more, getting a start with things like ArcGIS or QGIS, these courses are the introductory or preparatory courses for more advanced analysis. So if you're an undergraduate student, whether you're in the geography department or whether you're joining us from a different department, please consider those classes. They come with a lecture and a lab, so you get real hands-on experience. We are also offering a number of other undergraduate courses that can either lead to a minor in GIS or geography or a Bachelor of Arts degree. So go ahead and let's take a look at the graduate offerings. So similar to an undergraduate, there are some introductory courses for GIS at the graduate level. The Urban Planning 275 series is geared for graduate level study. It has an urban planning focus, but those 4-unit classes will also give you those foundations of understanding in GIS. And the courses, again, highlighted in yellow, are the courses that will be offered this spring semester. There are a number of other courses geared for earning a certificate in technology in the Master of Urban Planning program, an advanced certificate in GIS in the geography program, or even a master's degree along those lines. Okay, so advancing one slide. As I mentioned, there are a number of options. The GIS minor, which I think is great no matter what discipline you're studying for your major, is only 15 units. So that could be as little as 3 classes or 4 classes, depending on your schedules and availability. We have the Bachelor of Arts, which is designed to be 1 to 2 years in addition to courses you're taking for just university requirements. And then the graduate level certificate. This is a great option for students or alumni who want to study, but maybe not fully commit to a master's program at this time. The advanced certificate is 18 units. It can be done through Open University. That means that with just a transcript from any bachelor's degree in any discipline, a student can join those classes. So it's not a full application process. It's a good way to get taking some courses which may eventually lead to earning a Master of Arts in either geography or a Master of Urban Planning in our department. So there are a lot of exciting options. I strongly recommend that if you have questions or interests in these technologies and how you might apply them in your studies while at San Jose State, there's an email address, urbanplanning@sjsu.edu. We also have both advisors. The undergraduate advisor is myself. You can email me, Carrie Rohrmeyer, and we also, one of our panelists, Dr. Catherine Richardson, is the graduate advisor for both the advanced certificate in GIS and the Master of Arts in Geography. So please reach out. We would love to see you in our classes and are very excited about the information that GIS Day is presenting today. So thanks so much. I think with that, I'm going to hand it back to Ohora.
Thank you, Carrie. We have one question. Each process with no background is my person. So we have a question from Joshua that I'm a faculty member, but I have no, let me turn on my video. Okay. I'm a faculty member, but I have no GIS training. Can you suggest a strategy that a researcher with no background in GIS might pursue to develop some basic proficiency? Well, we have faculty members. If you are a faculty member at San Jose State, we have currently faculty members who are joining our courses. This semester alone, we have 2 faculty members that they took Geography 170 as introduction to GIS and mapping. So my suggestion here is to, while Dr. Rohemir, she presented the courses, they are open to faculty member at San Jose State University as well. So feel free to take those courses because currently we have faculty members taking our courses.
Yes. There was also some mention in the chat about learning QGIS. Will you be teaching that in the spring?
Yes, both Professor Cross and I, we are covering QGIS Advanced. Next semester, 171, we are integrating QGIS in our Advanced GIS course as well. Professor Cross is also covering QGIS in his course too. But thank you for bringing that up. Okay, any more questions? We are getting closer to the most exciting part of our program. So if there is no question, I'm gonna hand the presentation to Professor Cost to cover our story map competition winner announcement.
Great, thank you, Ohura. And I wonder if you could call up the slides again, please.
Sure.
So one of the most exciting aspects, I hope, of today's event, besides our excellent speakers, is we sponsored our very first story map competition. And for those that are not familiar, story maps are a way to integrate a variety of media, text, graphics, videos, maps into basically a web page that's interactive. So it's essentially a web application. And we invited students from around the Bay Area to submit their story maps. And happy to say we received 13 entries, and 9 of those entries made it to the hands of our judges, who I'll introduce in just a moment. And the judges were asked to evaluate the story maps according to their originality, the information that they included, if they were visually engaging, visually intriguing, and also if the students integrated multiple aspects to the story map, such as historic maps or 3D scenes. So the judges evaluated the 9 maps, and we have the judges shown here. And I believe Priyanka is with us of these judges. So Priyanka, thank you. Get to thank you in person. But we had judges from around the Bay Area: Julie Sweetkind-Singer from Stanford, Allison Mizan from Foothill, Will Harmon and Jennifer Red from here at San Jose State. And as you see here, Priyanka Vyas also from Stanford. So big, big thanks to the judges. They took a lot of time to very, very carefully review all 9 of the entries. And according to the metrics that they used, we would like to announce the winners of the story map competition. And I believe, Carrie, you're going to lead us off with that.
Oh, very exciting. Thank you. All right, let's take a look. The slides have the names. Our first prize winner is Alex Pagel, who's joining us from the Civil Engineering Department, who created a story map entitled Timber Mills to Tech Hub, South Lake Union's Transformation. This was an excellent story map, and we're so proud to have it as our first prize winner. And I want to point out that each of these prizes come with a cash award. So that's a wonderful prize for a student. So congratulations, Alex. Okay, our second prize winner.
Okay, let's clap hand for the first place winner and second place.
Our second place winner joins us from the Department of Urban and Regional Planning, is a master's candidate, so nearing completion of his graduate degree, and prepared a story map called Quick Improvements with Slow Streets, and it's about Oakland's public spaces during the pandemic. Congratulations, Gavin Laurie.
Good job, Gavin.
And we have one more prize winner. Third place goes to Alexandria Burnaby, who's joining us from the Political Science Department. Congratulations on your story map called The Harmony of Compton's From Past to Present. And from politics to music, a hub city is more than what meets the eyes. Really wonderful story map.
Perfect. So we had to basically mention that the Department of Urban and Regional Planning sponsored the cash prizes, and we were lucky to have eCampus. Dr. Red also sponsored 5 more awards for Esri licenses. That it was a very difficult process to select the winners, but thanks to judges that they helped us with the process. We have more congratulations to go to Dexter Kennedy, Kevin Lee, Janik Strauss, Jason Lee, Judy Heher, and Beichi Chu for being the winners of Esri License Awards. Thank you to both department, to eCampus for sponsoring the awards. Thank you to everybody who submitted story map. I'm gonna hand, we are a little bit ahead of our schedule, which is fine. I'm gonna now ask Dr. Ramasubramanian to basically conclude our event.
Thank you, Ahura, and thank you to everyone who's participated in this GIS Day event. While I'm speaking, there's a request in the chat for an example of a story map. Is that possible on the fly?
Yes, I'd be happy to. I already have one lined up, which is our first place winner from Alex Pagels. Would you like me to show it?
Why don't you do that, Rick? Thank you.
Sure. So I see that the question was posted by Gary. Gary, I'm glad you could join us today. So here is Alex's really wonderful story map, and he focused on an area of Seattle that's growing very rapidly. And Alex actually produced this map for my summer GIS class, and I was thrilled he submitted it for this competition. So what I really like, and I see that the judges clearly agree, is that the story map contains many different components. First of all, the information is organized in a timeline fashion, as you can see here. And it includes very well-written, clear, succinct text coupled with very engaging, visually stimulating photos. And he traces the history of this part of Seattle from its industrial past, starting around 1850. He has some really interesting historic imagery here. And not only maps, but also photographs, as you can see here. But as you progress through the story map, what I really like about Alex's map is he embedded some interesting content. So here, for example, you can see some of the layers that he used for this map. So he included 1983, 1909, and 1894 layers. You can turn these on and off to see how the neighborhood evolved over time. So this is what's meant by a web mapping application. This is an interactive component, in this case, of a story map. If we keep going, we get more into the present day. And here, Alex was really interested in looking at some of the general plan, the master planning for this neighborhood in Seattle. This, I have to say, this is my personal favorite feature here. He used a swipe function. You'll see, I'll move this image back and forth to compare the urban development in 2002 with 2019. And if you look towards the lower center of the map, you can see really how rapidly this area developed with some of these major new buildings. And finally, the last part of Alex's story map includes, I guess you might call it like a guide, a walking tour. So notice the map at the upper left has numbered items, and those numbered items correspond as you scroll through to the different photographs that I'm showing here. So once again, tracing the history of the South Lake neighborhood from its industrial past to its present nature. I guess I'd call it a hip neighborhood. So again, I'm very delighted that the judges found Alex's map to be worthy of the first prize. And the second and third prize winners were not far behind. Their maps were equally as dynamic and interesting. So yeah, thanks, Gary, for the request. I'm happy to show it.
Thank you, Rick. It's my pleasure to bring this event to a close by thanking everyone who worked in the front of the scenes and behind the scenes to make this event a success. So thanks to John Curiel and Kurt Menke for your excellent presentations and for stimulating our conversation and discussions today by the way you engaged with our audience as well. Thank you so much. Thank you to Dr. Jennifer Redd from eCampus for your support of this event and also for sponsoring the ESRI licenses for our student poster story map winners. Thank you to our faculty, without whom this is not possible. Ahura Zandia Tashbar, Kerry Rohrmeyer, Rick Koss, and Catherine Richardson. You are the SAVI Center team And without you, we couldn't do all of this. So thank you so much. And finally, thank you to our students, our audience, and colleagues from around the world who have joined us today in this virtual platform to make our GIS Day event a success. Thank you.
We have one concluding poll, Laxmi, that do you want to invite?
Yes, I thank you for the gentle reminder, Aurora. So let's launch the poll and people should take it. And if you want to leave a comment in the chat, please do. With that, we conclude.
Okay, so the concluding poll is open. It's a good help for us as we are planning for annual events as we do. Please fill out the poll. There are multiple choices that you can select, so feel free to select more than one choice in this question.
It's really interesting to see how the poll starts to fill.
Yeah.
I think I'd like to take this time while the poll is populating to say that in the spring we have a couple of events planned as part of our SAVI Center series of webinar events. So please look out for that, and please get in touch with us via email, or perhaps Ahura, you can put our center email on the chat for all
Sure.
attendees.
Sure. Let me get this on here. I need, yeah, I just put the email there. We also recorded the events today that would be released on our YouTube channel as well. That the event was live on Facebook, so the video is going to stay on our department Facebook page as well for those of you who asked about the possibility of catching up with recording. Okay, it's we have 5 more attendees who fill out the poll. Thank you very much for your participation in the poll. Of course, the future events that they're going to come about of SAVI GIS talks, they're going to focus on GIS application, case study, and career advice in GIS. So with that end, thank you very much for your attention, and we will be in touch.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.